He's just a useless janitor, Priya. Why did you bring this street kid into my high-class workplace? Get him out!
Tyler Holt sneered, slamming his hands down. He glared at 17-year-old Isaiah Webb, his face twisted with pure disgust.
Look at you, kid. You're a beggar in need of help, wearing that cheap maintenance uniform. You're not smart enough to understand our billion-dollar artificial intelligence, let alone fix it. Get out of here. This isn't a place you're allowed to set foot in. People like you always think they can leech off our success, but you don't belong here. You never will. Now, take your filthy mop, shut your mouth, and go scrub the toilets where you actually belong before I destroy any chance you have of a future.
Tyler and billionaire CEO Garrett Whitfield genuinely believed they could stomp on this boy's dignity. They had no idea their company was hours away from a catastrophic $2 billion investor crash. But as they looked down on him with venomous arrogance, the quiet teenager didn't break. Instead, Isaiah calmly reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a faded 1,999 dissertation page. He wasn't a helpless bystander. He was the genius son of Dr. Loretta Webb, the legendary black mathematician whose brilliant framework these elites had stolen, exploited, and erased for 8 years. And he was about to unleash absolute hell. Welcome back to Legacy Stories, where arrogant power meets absolute justice, and the truth always demands a full accounting. If you are ready to see a brilliant 7-year-old, completely dismantle a multi-billion-dollar empire built on a lie, smash that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss a single second of this jaw-dropping reckoning. Let's step inside the freezing server room, where the first domino of this epic revenge began to fall at 11:47 p.m. on a fateful Tuesday night. The server room was the coldest place in the building, and Isaiah preferred it that way. He had been mopping the same 20 by 30-foot rectangle of raised flooring for 11 months every Tuesday and Friday night, 9 p.m. to 2 a.m., and he had come to understand its specific geography the way you understand a place you have studied with full attention. The rows of blade servers humming in their black racks, the red and green indicator lights that pulsed in patterns he had long since memorized, the particular quality of the climate-controlled air, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 40% humidity, maintained with the precision that server hardware required and that the 112 employees of Nexus AI's main building never quite received. He knew the servers by their addresses. He knew which rack held the primary training cluster. He knew which 3 machines in the northeast corner contained the production model for the MediSense diagnostic system, the system that Nexus AI was going to demonstrate tomorrow morning to a room full of investors who were collectively prepared to commit $2 billion if the demo went as planned. He knew what was inside those machines, which was more than most of the people who had built them could say. Isaiah was 17 years old and had spent the last 11 months being invisible in a way that was its own form of preparation. The maintenance uniform helped. The age helped. The fact that powerful people in expensive buildings tend not to look at the people whose labor maintains those buildings that help most of all. He had walked past Garrett Whitfield in the corridor 14 times. Whitfield had not once registered his presence in any way that suggested he understood he was looking at a person rather than a piece of moving furniture. Tyler Holt had once asked him to move his cleaning cart so that a team photo could be taken in the corridor and had thanked him by looking past him toward the camera. Isaiah had made note of all of it. He had been making notes for 11 months. In a composition notebook he kept in the same pocket as the dissertation page, writing in the small, precise handwriting his mother had taught him when he was 6 years old. The notes were not dramatic. They were the kind of notes that a careful, methodical person keeps when they are building an understanding of a system. Who was in which meeting, which engineers worked on which component, what the commit cadence looked like on Thursday nights before a major milestone, how Priya Nair was the only person who regularly stayed past 11, what the failure patterns looked like when the system was being tested under real clinical conditions versus the curated test data the company used for internal benchmarks. He had been clean about everything he was doing. He had not accessed anything he was not authorized to access. His key card opened the server room, the cafeteria, the maintenance supply areas, and the third-floor bathrooms, nothing more. Everything he knew about the code, he had read over people's shoulders or inferred from conversations carried at volumes appropriate for people who had decided the maintenance worker in the corridor was not listening. He had been listening very carefully. He had been a careful listener his entire life, which was the skill most directly responsible for the fact that he had been accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Caltech by February of his senior year, which was the year he took the maintenance job in Silicon Valley rather than finishing his final semester at Compton High School. His mother had accepted this plan with the specific silence of a woman who understood what her son was doing and was not going to stop him, and was also not going to pretend she didn't spend 3 evenings a week rereading the acceptance letters from the 3 universities and thinking about the sequence of events that had produced them. He'd been clean about everything. He wanted the record to be unambiguous when it mattered. He had been told by 3 separate people who knew something about how justice worked in institutional settings that unambiguous records were the only kind that survived contact with institutions. His grandmother had told him this. His mother had told him this. And a civil rights attorney named Marilyn Cross, who taught a Saturday workshop at the Compton Library for students interested in social justice law, had told him this in language that was precise and unsentimental, and that he had written in his composition notebook verbatim. He carried that notebook. He carried the dissertation page. He carried the mechanical pencil his mother had given him the morning he left for Silicon Valley, which was the same mechanical pencil she had used to draft the equations in her dissertation in 1999 because she could not afford the specific pen she wanted and had decided that the instrument mattered less than the thinking. He thought about her every shift. Not with sentimentality, he was not a sentimental person. Having been formed by a life that offered sentiment few opportunities to establish itself, but with the specific quality of attention a person gives to the reason they are doing a difficult thing, when the difficult thing becomes harder. He had been in this building for 11 months. He had been patient for 17 years. He could be patient for another few hours. He had not known the demo was tomorrow until 2 weeks ago, when he had overheard Garrett Whitfield on a call in the second-floor corridor. He had adjusted his shift schedule with Ron, the facilities manager, to ensure he was in the building on the Tuesday night before. Ron had been happy to oblige because the Tuesday to Wednesday overnight was the shift nobody wanted. Isaiah had wanted it. He was mopping the server room corridor at 11:47 p.m. when he heard Tyler Holt's voice through the closed door of the engineering bullpen, and the first domino of everything he had been building toward for 3 years began to fall. At 11:47 p.m., on a Tuesday in late August, Isaiah was pushing a mop down the corridor outside the server room when he heard the first sign that the night was about to become what he had been waiting for. It came in the form of Tyler Holt's voice, carrying from behind a closed door with the particular high-pitched quality that comes from someone trying not to sound as panicked as they are. It's not a surface-level crash. Something in the core weighting function is throwing NN on every edge case that involves populations with a pause. I know what time the demo is. Tell me something I don't already know. Isaiah stopped mopping. He looked at the closed door of the engineering bullpen. He did not move toward it. He was very still. He had been very still for 11 months. He listened. The voice continued, lower now, controlled with effort. More voices joined it. He heard the words outlier population and variance threshold and catastrophic failure rate, and then a sound that was not a word, but rather the particular silence of a room full of intelligent people who have just discovered that the thing they built is not what they thought it was. Isaiah picked up his mop. He continued down the corridor. He had not come here to rush. He had come here to see. He had seen enough. By 1 a.m., he had finished the server room, the 2 corridor bathrooms, and the cafeteria. He was filling his mop bucket at the utility sink when the engineering bullpen door opened and Priya Nair came out looking for coffee. She was 29, fast, and the kind of tired that has moved past urgency into something quieter and more honest. She had been Nexus AI's 3rd engineering hire. She had built more of the MetaSense system than anyone else in the building, and she had been the first person to notice, 18 months ago, that the core weighting function had a fundamental problem under high variance conditions. She had flagged it in 3 separate code reviews. The flag had been downgraded twice by Tyler Holt and once by Garrett Whitfield, who had described her concern as theoretically sound but operationally premature in a comment that was still preserved in the project's version history. Tonight, the thing she had flagged 18 months ago had arrived. She stopped at the sight of Isaiah at the utility sink. Then she looked again, more specifically. He was wearing his maintenance uniform gray shirt, navy pants, key card on a lanyard. He was 17 years old and had the particular quality of stillness that she had noticed from the first week when she had passed him in the server room corridor and he had been looking at the rack indicators with an expression that was not the passive gaze of a person waiting for time to pass, but the active attention of someone reading, Hey, she said. Hey. Isaiah turned off the tap. She hesitated. This was not the kind of conversation she normally had at 1 a.m. with the maintenance staff. You've been here when I'm here before. Late. Most Tuesday and Friday nights, he said. You usually stay past midnight on Tuesdays. She looked at him. How long have you been listening? Isaiah set the mop handle against the wall with careful deliberateness. Long enough, he said, to know that the problem you have tonight is not a bug. It's a foundational error in how the weighting function handles outlier populations. Your test environment was demographically narrow enough that the failure condition never triggered. The production data is diverse enough that it triggers constantly. He paused. The function was written incorrectly at its base, and fixing the surface error without replacing the foundation will not work, and will probably make it worse, which is what has been happening for the last 2 hours. Priya stood very still. How do you know that? She said. Because I know what the correct version of the function looks like, he said. And this isn't it. She took him to the engineering bullpen. He had been in this room in the maintenance sense, vacuuming, replacing a ceiling tile, once helping move a server rack, but never in this sense, walking through the door as someone with something to offer. Tyler Holt was at the main terminal. He was 31 and looked 45 tonight. Blue light catching the specific pallor of someone whose professional competence is actively disintegrating in front of them. He looked up when Priya entered. He looked at Isaiah with the reflexive dismissal of someone who has not registered that there is another person present at a level that requires acknowledgement. I need a coffee and a different error trace, he said to Priya. He can fix the algorithm, Priya said. Tyler Holt looked at Isaiah. He looked at his uniform. He looked at his age with the specific speed of someone calculating something. He's the janitor, he said, not cruelly, simply as a statement of the category into which he had placed this person, and a clarification that this category did not intersect with the category of people who could fix a core AI weighting function. He knew what was wrong before I told him anything, Priya said. Priya. Tyler's voice carried the patience of a man managing a subordinate who was not reading the room. We have 6 hours before Garrett walks a group of investors through a demo of a system that is currently returning NaN on 42% of inputs. I need solutions, not. The error is in the Bayesian weighting function, Isaiah said, specifically in how it handles the prior probability distribution for outlier populations. The function assumes a normal distribution and discards values beyond 2 standard deviations as noise. In a demographically homogeneous test population, that assumption holds. In a diverse clinical population, it eliminates the data points that are most medically significant. He looked at the error trace on Tyler Holt's terminal. That's not a bug. That's a design decision that was wrong from the beginning. The room had gone quiet. 3 other engineers had been working at other terminals and were now watching. Tyler Holt looked at Isaiah for a long moment. Then he said, with the careful weight of someone who has just recognized something he does not want to have recognized, "Where did you learn that?" Isaiah reached into his breast pocket. He unfolded the paper twice along its worn creases. He set it on the desk beside Tyler Holt's keyboard. From this, he said. Tyler Holt looked at the paper. He read the title. He read the author line. The color that was already absent from his face found new depths of absence. That's he started. My mother's dissertation, Isaiah said, which your company built its core framework on, which she was never credited for, never compensated for, and which you've been using for 8 years. He paused. I've been working in this building for 11 months. I've seen the code. I know where you buried the citation, and I know you know that the correct version of this function exists, in full, in that dissertation. He looked at the terminal. The wrong version is crashing your demo. If you want me to implement the correct version, I will. But we should be clear about what that means and what it's going to cost you. Silence in the engineering bullpen. The servers hummed from behind the wall. Outside the windows, Silicon Valley was arranged in its grid of light, enormous and indifferent. Tyler Holt stood up slowly. He picked up the dissertation page and held it. He read the author line again. He looked at Isaiah's face, the jaw, the eyes, the particular quality of calm that had nothing to do with youth, and something moved behind his expression that was not recognition exactly, because he had always known, but was something closer to the specific horror of being seen by the person you wronged, rather than the person you wronged being absent, which is so much easier. I need to call Garrett, he said. His voice had changed. I know, Isaiah said. Call him. Garrett Whitfield arrived at 1:38 a.m. in a car that was worth more than Isaiah's mother earned in 3 years. He was 45, silver-haired in the way that tech executives are silver-haired deliberately, as a signal that they are past the age of ambition and have now entered the age of authority. He came into the engineering bullpen with the rolling energy of a man who is used to solving problems by displacing them. He saw the engineers. He saw Priya. He saw Tyler Holt's expression. He saw Isaiah. His gaze moved across Isaiah in the specific way that it had moved across him every time their paths had crossed in this building over 11 months. With the efficient, practiced invisibility of a powerful person who has long since stopped noticing the people whose labor maintains the physical space around him. "What's the status?" he said to Tyler. "We have a path to fix the system," Tyler said. His voice was carefully neutral. "But there's a situation you need to understand first. Is the system fixable?" "Yes." "Is the fix ready to deploy by 7 a.m.? Tyler paused. "Isaiah is the one who can fix it." Garrett Whitfield turned and looked at Isaiah with the first real attention he had ever given him. Isaiah watched this happen, watched the calculation that moved through Whitfield's face, the assessment of categories, the resistance to information that didn't fit. "He's the maintenance," Whitfield started. "He knows what's wrong with the waiting function," Priya said. "He's been able to describe the exact failure mode for the last 40 minutes. He knows the correct implementation." She paused. "He has a copy of the 1999 dissertation by Loretta Webb. He says we built our core framework on her work." The name landed in the room with the weight of a thing that had been carefully contained for a long time and had just been released. Garrett Whitfield did not look surprised. This was important. If he had looked surprised, it would have meant something different. He looked instead like a man who had known a specific reckoning was coming and had spent 8 years hoping it would arrive after the company's position was secure enough to absorb it. "I need you to leave," he said to Isaiah, not loudly. With the calm of institutional power being applied at low pressure, the kind that doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. "The system is failing," Isaiah said. "You have a $2 billion demo in 5 hours and 18 minutes. And the only person in this building who can fix it is standing in front of you wearing your company's cafeteria uniform." He looked at Garrett Whitfield without looking away. "So I'd think carefully about that instruction." Garrett Whitfield stood in the doorway of his own engineering bullpen and looked at a 17-year-old black boy in a maintenance uniform who was the son of a woman he had wronged and who was now the only person standing between his company and catastrophe. He processed this information. The processing was visible in his face as a series of recalculations that he did not try to hide because he was past the age of pretending he wasn't making them. "Sit down," he said finally. Isaiah sat down at the terminal Tyler Holt had vacated. He pulled up the relevant code library. He began reading. Garrett Whitfield watched him read for 30 seconds, then 30 more. He watched the precision with which those 17-year-old eyes moved across the lines of code, not searching, but verifying, the way you verify something against a known reference. He watched Isaiah's right hand reach into his breast pocket without looking away from the screen and unfold the dissertation page and set it on the desk beside the keyboard. He watched the boy begin to type. Isaiah coded for 3 hours and 40 minutes. He did not explain himself as he worked. He did not perform the work for the engineers watching him. He simply worked quiet, precise, moving through the function library with the specific efficiency of someone who knows the correct answer and is implementing it rather than discovering it. The engineers on either side of him began, slowly and with the careful non-acknowledgement of people pretending something is not happening, to follow his work, to watch the lines being written, to understand what they were looking at. It was mathematics that Isaiah had been reading since he was 12 years old. The derivation in his mother's dissertation was 91 pages, and he had memorized it in the way that you memorize something you return to repeatedly, not for information but for the quality of the thinking, the elegance of it, the way each step followed from the previous one, with the inevitability of a proof that was correct at every level simultaneously. His mother had built it in the years when she was 24 and 25 and 26, sitting in an office in the UCLA Department of Mathematics with the specific intensity of someone doing the best work of their life and knowing it. He thought about her at 24, as he wrote. It was an unusual thing to think about your mother as a young person you had never known, full of a work that had not yet been suppressed. He thought about her hands on a pen, not his mechanical pencil, a different pen, a pen he had never seen, writing equations that were now becoming code under his own hands 25 years later. He wrote the prior distribution correction. He rewrote the outlier handling logic. He rebuilt the variance threshold calculation from the ground up, using the derivation in Chapter 4 of the dissertation as his reference the way a carpenter uses a plumb line, not as decoration, but as truth. At 2:54 a.m., Priya said quietly, "That's the prior distribution correction." "Yes," Isaiah said. "That's not what we had." "No," he said. "What you had was a simplified version that performs well in narrow conditions and fails in diverse ones. This is the correct version." He paused. "It's in the dissertation, Chapter 4, pages 78 through 91. The full derivation." He said this without looking up, because he was in the middle of a particularly delicate section involving the boundary conditions for the weighting function, and boundary conditions required full attention. The elegance of his mother's solution was that it handled the boundaries without additional heuristics. The main function was sufficient. The inelegance of the Nexus AI implementation was that someone had tried to simplify it by introducing heuristics where the correct mathematics didn't need them, which had the effect of making it appear to work while actually making it more brittle. A heuristic is always a choice about which cases matter, which is another way of saying a choice about which people matter, and the choice that had been made in the original implementation had produced a system that performed beautifully on demographically narrow test populations and failed on the populations who most needed accurate medical diagnostics. Isaiah understood this not just mathematically, but in the way that a person whose family had been shaped by institutional decisions about whose health mattered understands it. His grandmother on his mother's side had died of a cardiac event in 2011 inches, a hospital in Compton, where she had been told twice that her chest pain was probably stress. She had been 58 years old. She had been a retired school teacher with a perfect attendance record. She had been prescribed a mild anxiolytic and sent home from 2 emergency department visits before the third one, at which she had been admitted for a myocardial infarction that had been occurring, by the cardiologist's later assessment, for approximately 48 hours. Isaiah had been 6 years old. He did not remember this directly. He remembered it through his mother's face when the subject came up, through the specific way his mother said the word institution when she was describing the places that had made decisions about who received adequate care. He was writing code for a medical diagnostic system. He understood what the boundary conditions meant. At 3:17 a.m., Tyler Holt said something that he had not planned to say, in a voice that had no performance left in it. There used to be a comment in this library. In the original implementation, a reference to a source document. He did not look at Isaiah when he said this. He looked at the screen. "I removed it in the 2018 code-based migration. I was told it was a licensing concern. The engineering bullpen was very quiet." "By whom?" Priya said. Tyler Holt did not answer. He did not need to. At 3:42 a.m., Isaiah stopped typing. He ran the test suite. He watched the failure rate that had been 42% begin to descend. 38, 21, 11, 4, 0.3. He ran a second test with a high-variance clinical dataset. The failure rate was 0.1%, within the expected margin of individual statistical variance. He pushed the commit. The commit message read, "Core weighting function corrected to accurate Bayesian prior distribution for outlier inclusive analysis. Credit, Webb, 1,999 pages, 78:91. Full derivation available in source document." He left the comment in the code. He had thought about this moment for a long time, and it was exactly as quiet as he had expected it to be. Not dramatic. Just a commit message, 8 words of attribution that had been absent for 8 years, now present, preserved in version history in a way that could not be undone without leaving a visible trace of the undoing. He leaned back in the chair. He reached into his breast pocket and took out his phone. "I need to make a call," he said. Nobody stopped him. His mother answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring, even at 3 in the morning, because she was a woman who had learned that calls at unusual hours were usually important. "Isaiah." Her voice was careful in the way it was always careful when she was monitoring for information before committing to an emotional register. "Where are you?" "I'm at Nexus AI," he said. A silence. Then, "Isaiah." A different quality. "What did you do?" "I fixed their algorithm," he said. "The one they built on your dissertation." He kept his voice level. "It was failing. It was failing because they used your approach incorrectly. I used the correct version. He paused. Mom, the comment is in the code now. The reference is there. They can't take it back. It's in the version history. He heard her breathing. What are they saying? She said. Not much, he said. The CTO is in the room. He knows. He's known the whole time. Another silence. Longer. He heard something in it that he had only heard a few times in his life, the specific quality of his mother's silence, when she was feeling something she had not prepared to feel tonight and was deciding what to do with it. Baby, she said, I need you to be careful. They are going to try to make this about the code, about the demo, about the money, and not about what was done. Her voice was steady. Not angry, his mother's anger had burned itself into something cleaner and colder over 20 years. Don't let them make it about the money. The money is not the point. I know, he said. That's why I already emailed everything to myself. The Git history, the original commit comments that Tyler Holt deleted, the dissertation page, the dates. He paused, and I emailed it to 3 other addresses. A very brief silence. Then something that was not quite a laugh, but carried a laugh's warmth. You are so much like your grandmother, she said. She never walked into a room without a plan to walk out of it. I learned from you, he said. What do you need me to do? She said. Nothing tonight, he said. In the morning, I need you to call UCLA's Office of Research Integrity. I have the number. I'll text it to you. He paused. And Mom, one of the investors tomorrow is Diana Reeves. Another silence. Different quality. He heard the weight of a name arriving. Diana Reeves was on the committee, his mother said finally. The tenure committee. I know. A long pause. Isaiah. Yes? You planned all of this. He looked at the dissertation page on the desk beside the keyboard. The paper soft from years of folding and unfolding. The ink on the title line slightly faded at the crease. He thought about a woman sitting at a kitchen table, grading papers at midnight. He thought about a closed door and a letter that arrived on a Thursday morning. He thought about a career that had been redirected into a high school classroom, where his mother had spent 23 years teaching mathematics to students who needed her, and not being given the credit for the idea that had made another person's company worth $2 billion. She deserves to have her name on what she built, he said. That's all. He hung up. He folded the dissertation page twice along its creases. He put it back in his pocket. He stood up. He looked at the screen one more time, the clean error trace, the 0.1%, the commit message with its clear, unambiguous attribution, and then he looked at Garrett Whitfield, who had been standing against the far wall for the last 2 hours, watching a 17-year-old correct the intellectual mistake of Nexus AI's entire existence. I'm going to finish my shift, Isaiah said. The bathrooms on the second floor still need to be done. He picked up his key card from the desk where he had set it. He walked to the door. Isaiah, Garrett Whitfield's voice. He stopped. He did not turn around. The demo Whitfield started. The demo will work, Isaiah said. I fixed it. He paused. That's what I came here to do. He walked out of the engineering bullpen. The door swung shut behind him. In the corridor, the fluorescent lights were steady and institutional, and his footsteps were quiet on the clean floor, and he went to find the mop. The investors arrived at 9 a.m. There were 11 of them, and they came in the way that people with this kind of money come into rooms with a particular weight of consequence, the specific quality of attention that belongs to people whose presence itself is a form of evaluation. They were led through a prepared tour of the facility, offered coffee, and directed to the main conference room where the MediSense diagnostic system demo was scheduled for 9:30. Diana Reeves was the last to enter. She was 56 years old and had the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms where the stakes were high and learned that stillness is a form of power. She had built Reeves Capital over 22 years into a $400 million fund focused on education and health technology. She was the most important investor in the room. She also had a doctorate from MIT and 14 years of prior experience as a research mathematician. She was the only person in the room besides Isaiah who would understand exactly what the commit message in the codebase meant. She was also the person who had been a member of the UCLA Department of Mathematics Faculty Committee in 1999. Isaiah had found her name in the committee minutes while he was 14 and building his research. He had found her name, and then he had found her career trajectory. And then he had understood that Diana Reeves was not simply someone who had been present at the wrong decision. She was someone who had spent 22 years building a fund dedicated to precisely the kind of people and work that the committee she had sat on had refused to support. She had been making amends at scale for 2 decades without having made the specific amend that was at the origin of the debt. Isaiah had thought about this for a long time. He had thought about whether Diana Reeves was an ally or an obstacle or something more complicated than either. He had concluded that she was the only person in the room, besides Priya, who would look at the commit history and understand immediately and completely what it meant, and that this made her the most important person in the room. He had not told his mother about Diana Reeves. He had thought about it many times over 11 months. He had decided that some things needed to arrive at the moment they were meant to arrive, without being prepared for. His mother had lived with the weight of what that committee had done for 25 years. She did not need to carry the knowledge of Diana Reeves's presence in the room overnight. She needed to hear it when it was already resolved. That was the plan, and it had held. Garrett Whitfield gave the presentation. The medicine system performed perfectly. 0.1% failure rate, diverse clinical data set, edge case handling that was clean and elegant. The engineers in the room watched it run and did not show what they felt, which was the specific mixture of relief and something more complicated that comes from watching something built correctly after watching the incorrect version fail. When the demo ended, Diana Reeves asked one question. Who made the correction to the core weighting function last night? The room went still. Garrett Whitfield's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted like a building settling. Our engineering team identified the issue and deployed a fix, he said. Priya Nair said, "That's not accurate." Every head in the room turned. Priya was seated near the back wall. As the most junior person in the room is always seated near the back wall. She looked at Diana Reeves with the expression of someone who has decided that the cost of continuing to say nothing is now higher than the cost of speaking. She had made this decision at approximately 4 a.m., while watching Isaiah finish the final boundary condition and push the commit, and she had not changed it since. The fix was implemented by Isaiah Webb, she said. A maintenance worker, 17 years old. He identified the failure mode at approximately midnight, implemented the complete corrected weighting function over 4 hours, and committed it to the codebase with a citation to the original source of the correct approach. She paused. The citation reads, Webb, 1999, pages 78 through 91. Diana Reeves set down her coffee cup. She set it down with the careful deliberateness of a person who is ensuring that their hands are still before they continue, because what they are feeling requires containment before it can be useful. Webb, 1999, she said. Her voice had gone to a place that was entirely calm, which was not entirely calm. I'd like to see the commit history. She read it for 12 minutes. Nobody in the room spoke during those 12 minutes. The other investors looked at each other with the careful, peripheral attention of people who understand they are inside a situation that has become something other than the situation they expected. The engineers stood along the wall with the expressions of people who had been awake for 27 hours and had arrived at the specific quality of exhaustion that is past fear and into something simpler and more honest. Diana Reeves scrolled through the original commits, the 2018 migration that had removed the citation, and the previous night's correction that had reinstated it. She opened the dissertation page that Isaiah had photographed and attached to his email to the engineering team as documentation. She read the title, she read the author line, she read it again. She set the laptop on the conference table. I was on the UCLA Department of Mathematics faculty committee in 1999, she said. The committee that reviewed Loretta Webb's tenure application. She looked at the table, not at anyone in particular at the surface of the table, the way a person looks when they are addressing something that exists in a space that is not exactly in the room. I voted to deny it. She was quiet for a moment. The grounds cited were concerns about the originality of the theoretical framework. I knew, at the time, that those concerns were not well-founded. I knew the work was original. I knew it was significant. She paused. I did not say so. I did not say so because it was my 3rd year on the committee, and the other committee members were senior to me, and because the institutional momentum in the room was in a direction that I did not resist. She looked up. I have thought about that vote for 25 years. I have done a great deal of work in the time since that I believe was meaningful. I have told myself that the work was a form of repair. Today I understand that repair requires specificity. and that the specific thing I failed to do was something I have not yet addressed directly. The room was very quiet. Garrett, she said, I need to understand clearly. Did you know that this framework came from Loretta Webb's unpublished dissertation when you built this company on it? Garrett Whitfield looked at the table. He made the calculation that he had been making for 8 years and that had now become impossible to make in his favor. The calculation was simple. The truth was now in the version history of a widely used production system, in the public record of the meeting happening in this room, and in the inbox of at least 3 separate email addresses that a 17-year-old had sent it to at 3:45 inches the morning. There was no version of the calculation that landed on a number other than the correct one. He looked up. Yes, he said. I knew. Diana Reeves nodded. Slowly. Once. The nod of a person receiving information they already possessed but needed to hear confirmed, for reasons that were about accountability rather than knowledge. Then here is what I can do, she said. She looked at the other investors, then back at Whitfield. I will commit my fund's position $400 million to Nexus AI's Series C on one condition. The condition is not negotiable and is not subject to counter-proposal. She picked up her pen, not to write, to hold. The gesture of a person whose precision of language is the point. Dr. Loretta Webb receives formal written attribution as the originating author of the statistical framework on which this company's core technology is built. That attribution is published publicly in Nexus AI's official documentation and website within 7 days. Second, the dissertation is submitted with Nexus AI's full institutional support for peer review and publication in a relevant mathematical journal. 25 years late is 25 years late, and that cannot be undone, but it can be corrected going forward. Third, Nexus AI commissions an independent valuation of the economic contribution of the Webb framework to the company's current estimated value and makes a settlement offer to Dr. Webb within 60 days commensurate with that valuation. She set the pen down. Those are the terms. She looked at Garrett Whitfield. Not with satisfaction. Satisfaction would have been wrong. With the specific weight of a person who has spent 25 years arriving at a moment and is now in it, and finds that it feels exactly as important and exactly as insufficient as they expected. I am also telling you, she said, that if you decline, I will be filing a report with UCLA's Office of Research Integrity this afternoon regardless. The difference is whether you are ahead of that report or behind it. She paused. Isaiah Webb already filed one this morning. Through his mother. The room processed this information. Then Garrett Whitfield said, Tyler, draft the attribution agreement. Tyler Holt nodded. He did not look relieved. He looked like a man who was beginning to understand that the relief he would eventually feel had a very long walk ahead of it, and that the walk was appropriate, and that there was nothing to do but start. Isaiah was in the cafeteria when Priya found him. He was sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee and the dissertation page unfolded in front of him, reading it the way he had read it since he was 12, not for information, because he had it memorized, but for the specific quality of attention that a person gives to something that is about to change. The page looked different from this side of the night. The ink on the author line seemed sharper. He was aware that this was not actually the case, that the page was the same page it had always been, soft from years of folding, the crease slightly worn. But it looked different. Some things do. Once the account is settled, Priya sat down across from him. She set her phone on the table between them, the screen showing the signed attribution agreement, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. He read it. He read it again. He read the specific language of the attribution clause, which was precise and unambiguous in the way that legal language can be when it has been drafted by someone who wants it to be unambiguous. The settlement valuation process takes 60 days, she said. But my read of the valuation methodology they're using, if they're honest, which Diana Reeves will make sure they are, your mother should receive something in the range of $10 to $15 million. Isaiah looked at the phone for a long moment. That's not the point, he said. I know, Priya said, but it's also not nothing. He nodded slowly. He thought about the grocery store where his mother bought the same brand of low-cost yogurt every week because the difference between it and the brand she preferred was $1.89, and she had calculated at some point that $1.89 per week was $98.28 per year, and that $98.28 per year was 2 tanks of gas that could be applied to the drive to see her own mother's grave in Oakland twice a year instead of once. He thought about the summer she had not been able to afford the registration fee for the state mathematics competition, where Isaiah had placed second, which meant the entry fee had been paid by a teacher at his middle school, who had not told either of them where the money came from until 3 years later. He thought about $10 to $15 million and what it would mean for a woman who had been doing the same work at the same school for 23 years, quietly and with full knowledge that the intellectual labor of her 20s was generating extraordinary value for people who had never acknowledged her name. "Tell her yourself," Priya said. "I'll give you privacy." She stood up and walked to the other end of the cafeteria. Isaiah looked at the dissertation page for a moment longer. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring. "It's done," he said. "The agreement is signed." Diana Reeves held the line. He paused. "The dissertation is going to be published, Mom, with your name on it, with the correct attribution." He stopped speaking for a moment because his voice had arrived at a place where continuing required more control than he had available. The silence on the other end was not like the silences before. It was the specific quality of silence that happens when a person receives something they stopped allowing themselves to want many years ago, and has to find a way to receive it while also standing in a high school classroom in Compton with 23 years of papers graded at a kitchen table, pressing on all sides. "Baby," his mother said. Her voice was steady and absolutely not steady. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said. "Come home," she said. "Come home this weekend." "I will," he said. He hung up. He looked at the dissertation page on the table in front of him. He folded it twice along its creases, the precise creases of a thing that had been folded and unfolded 10,000 times, and put it back in his breast pocket. He stood up. He had 1 more hour on his shift. The server room needed to be done. He put on his gloves and went to do it. In the months that followed, the formal accounting of what had happened at Nexus AI was a long and complicated process that involved attorneys, mathematicians, an independent valuation firm, and 3 separate academic institutions. The process was not clean and it was not fast, because the things that had been done across 23 years do not resolve in 60 days, regardless of what agreements are signed in conference rooms with investors watching. It also involved, at various points, a formal complaint to the UCLA Office of Research Integrity, which opened an investigation in September, a review of the 1,999 tenure committee proceedings by a special faculty panel, which concluded in December with a finding that procedural irregularities and evidence of bias had affected the outcome, and an offer from UCLA to posthumously award Dr. Loretta Webb the doctorate she had been denied, a letter that arrived at Compton High School on a Thursday afternoon, and that Loretta Webb read at her kitchen table that evening 3 times before she called her son. Isaiah was in the Howard University library when his phone buzzed. He stepped outside into the October air, sat down on the steps with his back to the building, and listened to his mother read the letter aloud. She read it in her mathematician's voice, precise, unhurried, each clause given its proper weight. When she finished reading, there was a silence that lasted long enough for the moment to settle. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. "What are you going to do?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to accept it," she said. "Not because it fixes anything, but because Dr. Loretta Webb deserves to have the correct letters after her name." She paused. "And because it's something Destiny and Marcus and Kayla and all my students will hear about, and I want them to know that the correct thing eventually comes, even when it's very, very late." She paused again. "Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Now go study. You have a problem set due Friday." "I know," he said. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he said. He went back inside to study. What it all resolved into, eventually, was this. Dr. Loretta Webb's doctoral dissertation, Statistical Pattern Recognition in High-Variance Medical Diagnostic Systems, was submitted for peer review in October and published in the Journal of Applied Mathematics the following spring, 25 years, 7 months, and 11 days after it was first completed. The attribution line read, Loretta Ann Webb, Ph.D. This work was originally submitted to the University of California, Los Angeles, Department of Mathematics, 1999, and forms the foundational framework for the MetaSense diagnostic system developed by Nexus AI, Incorporated. The publication was accompanied by a 2-page editorial note from the journal's editor-in-chief, which described the circumstances of the dissertation's suppression and its subsequent use without attribution and which ended with a sentence that was quoted widely in the weeks following publication. This journal considers it a professional obligation, and not merely a courtesy, to note that the delay in this publication represents a failure not of the mathematics, but of the institutions responsible for recognizing it. The settlement Nexus AI paid Dr. Loretta Webb was $12.4 million, based on an independent valuation that assessed the Webb statistical framework as directly responsible for approximately 11% of the company's total estimated value. The settlement agreement included a clause, negotiated by Dr. Webb's attorney, requiring Nexus AI to include a formal attribution statement in all future product documentation, investor materials, and public communications referencing medicines. Tyler Holt resigned from Nexus AI in November. He issued a public statement that was 4 sentences long and said, accurately, if inadequately, that he had made choices early in his career that he regretted and that were not consistent with the professional standards he would now apply. He did not go into detail. The detail was already in the commit history, preserved in version control, as all things that are committed eventually are. He took a position at a smaller company in Austin, doing work unrelated to medical AI, and did not give interviews. Garrett Whitfield remained at Nexus AI. He made the correct business calculation and the correct moral calculation, and they happened to be the same calculation, which does not mean they were made for the same reason. He established, at Diana Reeves's recommendation, a formal attribution policy for all AI frameworks used in the company's products, and hired an independent research archivist to audit the company's full codebase for undocumented source materials. He also established a research ethics review process for all new framework implementations, chaired by an external ethics board that included 2 members of the National Society of Black Engineers. He did not receive credit for these things as acts of generosity, because they were not acts of generosity, they were acts of correction. Diana Reeves had been clear on the distinction, and Garrett Whitfield had been smart enough to accept it. Diana Reeves established the Webb Research Foundation with a $20 million endowment from her own fund, dedicated to supporting Black women pursuing doctoral degrees in mathematics, statistics, and applied sciences. She announced it at a press conference at which she read from the first page of Loretta Webb's published dissertation and did not attempt to offer an explanation for the 1,999 committee decision that would make the explanation adequate, because she was past the age of believing such explanations existed. She also resigned from the UCLA Board of Visitors in a letter that cited her determination to hold herself to a higher standard of accountability than the institution had held itself to in 1999. The letter was 3 paragraphs long and precise in the way that a mathematician's language is precise: no qualifications that were not earned, no apologies that were not specific. Priya Nair became head of engineering at Nexus AI. This was the correct decision, and the company made it within 3 months, which is faster than most institutions move and slower than it should have been. Isaiah Webb declined his offers of admission from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. He enrolled instead at Howard University, Department of Mathematics, on a full scholarship established in his name by the Nexus AI board as part of the public attribution settlement. He chose Howard specifically, and when asked why, he said that he wanted to be somewhere that had been built for his education rather than somewhere he had to fight to be in. He arrived at Howard in September. He was given a dormitory room on the 3rd floor of a building facing the quad. On the first day, he unpacked a backpack, a change of clothes, a laptop, 3 mathematics textbooks, and 1 item that he placed in the center of the desk before anything else. It was a framed copy of the cover page of his mother's published dissertation. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he sat down, opened his laptop, and began his first assignment. The assignment was in linear algebra, and it was straightforward, and he finished it in 40 minutes. And he thought about his mother grading papers at a kitchen table in Compton, and about a cardboard box in a hall closet, and about the specific weight of a folded piece of paper in a breast pocket, and about how long a thing can be true before the world catches up to it. Then he started the next problem. 3 weeks later, his mother stood in front of her 3rd period calculus class at Compton High School. The room was the same room she had occupied for 23 years, 3rd floor, east wing, the window that faced the parking lot and the street beyond it, and, on clear days, a strip of distant hills that turned blue in the late afternoon. She had painted the walls herself in the summer of 2004, a warm cream color, because the original institutional green had a quality she described to Isaiah once as the color of a building that doesn't believe in the people inside it. The principal had told her it was not technically permitted. She had painted them anyway and then offered to repaint them at her own expense if required. The principal had looked at the walls and said nothing, and the walls had stayed cream. The room was covered in student work. Problems solved in many different hands. The small, careful handwriting of students who were still building confidence, and the bold, looping script of students who had stopped worrying about being wrong equations annotated with color, where a student had wanted to show their thinking, diagrams that were technically imperfect and mathematically sound. One poster that a student named Marcus had made in 2019 that read, in hand-drawn letters 2 inches tall, "If you can describe it, you can calculate it. If you can calculate it, you can do it." She had never taken it down. On the whiteboard. The day's problem, which was a calculus problem about rate of change, which was one of the things Dr. Loretta Webb had been teaching for 23 years because she believed that rate of change was the most important mathematical concept for young people to understand. Not because they would all become engineers or scientists, though some of them would, but because rate of change was a way of thinking about the world that was useful in every domain. How fast is something moving? In what direction? And how can you tell from the information available to you? She believed this, and she taught it with the specific commitment of someone who had spent 23 years understanding that the beliefs you hold about what is worth teaching are ultimately the beliefs you hold about what people are capable of. On the wall behind her desk, framed in the simple black frame she had chosen herself from a shop on Vermont Avenue, was the cover page of the published dissertation. Statistical Pattern Recognition in High-Variance Medical Diagnostic Systems. A Weighted Bayesian Framework for Outlier, Inclusive Analysis. Loretta Webb, Ph.D. She had hung it there the week the journal issue arrived, on a Tuesday after school, when the room was empty, and the late light came through the window at the angle she had always liked. She had taken it out of its envelope and looked at it for a long time. Then she had put it in the frame and hung it on the wall and stood back and looked at it again. It had taken 25 years, 7 months, and 11 days for her name to appear in print above that work. It was there now. The frame was level. The light was good. A student in the third row, a 16-year-old girl named Destiny, who was good at mathematics in the way that some people are good at breathing, easily and without particularly noticing, looked at the frame and said, "Mrs. Webb, what's that?" It was not the first time a student had asked. It was the third, and she answered it the same way she had answered it before, directly, without excessive elaboration, in the voice she used when she wanted students to understand that what she was saying was worth remembering. "That is something I wrote a long time ago," she said. "Before you were born, it is a piece of mathematical research about how to build medical diagnostic systems that work accurately for everyone, not just for people who look like the majority of the test group." She paused. It was completed in 1999. It was published last spring. Those of you who are interested in the mathematics behind medical AI, which I recommend to all of you, can read it in the school library. I arranged for 3 copies to be available. Destiny looked at the frame for another moment. Why did it take so long to be published? The room was attentive in the way that a room full of 16-year-olds is attentive when they sense that the answer to a question is not going to be simple. Dr. Loretta Webb looked at Destiny. She looked at the room. She thought about what she wanted to say and what she was capable of saying in this room on a Tuesday morning in October, with 23 students watching, and what the difference was between those two things. Because the institution that was supposed to publish it decided not to, she said. And the reason they decided not to was not mathematical. It was something else. She looked at the frame again briefly. What I want you to take from that is not that institutions can be wrong, you already know that. What I want you to take from it is that being right is still worth something even when the institution disagrees. The mathematics was correct in 1999. It was still correct in 2024. Correct things do not become less correct because someone decides not to acknowledge them. She looked at the class. That is a mathematical principle, and it is also a life principle. I recommend holding on to it. Destiny nodded slowly. The room held the moment for a beat. Then Dr. Loretta Webb turned to the whiteboard. "Now," she said, "who can tell me what a Bayesian prior distribution is?" 3 hands went up. One of them was Destiny's. Dr. Loretta Webb smiled. Not the performed smile of a teacher giving positive reinforcement, the genuine smile of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be, doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, in a room that they have painted the right color and filled with the right work, with their name on the wall and their students' hands in the air. Good, she said. Let's begin. Outside, through the window, the late morning light was clear and specific over Compton, and the distant hills had not yet turned blue, and the room was full of the sound of young people who were, in the space of this hour at least, being asked to understand how quickly things change, and in which direction and what the information available to them could tell them about where they were going. Dr. Loretta Webb turned to the board. She picked up the marker. She began to write, "If you know someone whose work was ignored, dismissed, or taken without credit, leave a comment. And if you believe that correct things remain correct, regardless of whether the institution acknowledges them, share this story." The next one is one you won't want to miss. If you have ever watched someone you love be denied credit for what they built, leave a comment. And if you believe that when a system wrongs one generation, the next generation has the right to demand the accounting be paid in full, share this story. The next one is one you won't want to miss.